Background because I think it's going to illuminate a little bit of the perspectives that I want to bring for your consideration today on leadership, and I'll sort of give away the punchline. What I want to focus on today is less the technical components of leadership and more about the soft side of that. In other words, working with people and human beings, because I find that that's often the most challenging, but also the place where we can derive the most benefit from great leadership. And obviously, in your respective roles as volunteers and when you step into leadership roles within your volunteer groups, I think that's where we can find the greatest opportunities to advance our respective organizations and missions. So, as you heard, I actually have degrees in music and I loved it. I was a trumpet player. I worked very hard, and the truth is, I just wasn't that special at it. And that's fine. I accepted that early on. I was never going to win a job in the Dallas Symphony, for instance. And my dad suggested, as I was getting close to graduating from graduate school, he said, "Well, why don't you go work for the Boy Scouts as one of their executives?" And I grew up in that program because it'll give you general experience in a community. You'll meet business leaders and you'll just develop some basic skills and figure out what you want to do from there. So I followed my old man's advice and worked for the Boy Scouts for a number of years, originally in Oklahoma City as district executive, which is a generalist profession or career path where you have a territory. In my case, it was Norman, Oklahoma, and surrounding areas, and you're responsible for a variety of things: recruiting kids and working with volunteers, the governance structure of your district. Fundraising, of course, was a part of that. And I share that because at the very start of my career, working with volunteers was critical to my ability to achieve my objectives and be successful. And since that time, having worked for the Boy Scouts and some healthcare systems, a lot of work in higher education, and now with the performing arts organization, the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, in a variety of capacities, I've had the pleasure and benefit of working with literally thousands of volunteers performing all sorts of jobs from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life. And so, with that, I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned through all of this, and some of the specific things that I think can really make a difference for leaders in a volunteer organization. And I will say, whether you're paid staff like myself and you're on the administration side of an orchestra, or you are a volunteer who is in leadership position, I think a lot of these lessons and the dynamics are actually exactly the same. Because as you all know from your own personal experience, at the end of the day, no volunteer has to keep doing what they're doing. They can stop volunteering at any time. And so we have the same sort of requirements to properly support and motivate volunteers. Which brings me to my first point that I want to share with you about leadership, specifically in a volunteer setting, and that's that working with volunteers is both incredibly rewarding and very challenging. And I'm going to be very candid with you today, and I'm going to try to do so being very respectful. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings, and that means we're dealing with a diverse amount of experiences, backgrounds, perspectives. We also, as you know, never know what's going on in the background in somebody's life in any given day. Did they get bad news? Is there a health issue going on? It could be as simple as, and I know we've all experienced this, maybe there's just a personality conflict or a strong and considered difference of opinion of the right strategic way to achieve something. So, whether your volunteer organization has 10 people or 1,000 people, these are the challenges that we all face. And I think great leadership in this context often starts with a simple question. As leaders, how can we make the most of our differences? And to start there, I want to focus on the difference between management and leadership. And so often I find, and this is true for myself as well, when we're put in a position of leadership, it's really easy to default to management related tasks. Examples of that are setting and meeting timelines, facilitating key details for whatever projects you might be working on, and identifying and assigning tasks. Those are more management oriented issues. And I think the reason it's easy to default to those is it's easy to measure progress. Those things have to get done. I'm not suggesting they're not important for leaders to focus on and execute well on, but they're also, frankly, easier than the things that we would traditionally associate with leadership. And so, to contrast that, and the way I want to frame this with all of you today, leadership in my mind involves four key elements. It's setting a vision, creating alignment of purpose, inspiring people towards action against that vision and purpose, and then supporting them along the way. And as I mentioned at the beginning, and I'm saying this for some of the new folks who are just now joining us, I think great leadership really does come down to soft skills and human interaction skills and how we work with one another and relate to one another. And so, starting with setting a vision, I want to sort of work through some of that with you. And again, I want to encourage you to jump into the chat if you have questions or feedback or even a different perspective. I think healthy discussion is good. So, again, oftentimes I think we can make the mistake of getting stuck on management-related issues and forget what real leadership is about. And so starting with how we set a vision, because this goes to creating alignment of purpose. In my experience, the difference between a well-run organization that has great leadership and one that does not have such great leadership is one is typically just getting by. Sure, you might meet objectives, you might meet fundraising goals, you might have your event, but you're probably not thriving. You're probably not growing without great and true leadership. And you're probably not having the most significant impact that you can have for your home orchestra. And as I said, I think that process, as simple as it sounds, starts with setting a vision. And in this case, vision is literally just what we're working towards, or in our case, as volunteer organizations supporting a nonprofit, it often is very closely tied to our mission. And then the vision is just by extension, well, how do we best fulfill that mission within a given period of time? So we could discuss for days and a great deal of methodology about how to set and establish a vision. And frankly, we really don't have time to do all of that today. But what I want to do is just share a little bit of perspective about vision setting and give you a simple resource. And frankly, I think it's one you're probably all familiar with. But if you're not, it's great for you to access it. And if you haven't seen it in a while, I encourage you to go back to it. If you've heard of Simon Sinek, he's a very well-known TED Talk speaker, motivational speaker, and what I would say is an expert on leadership. Some years ago, 10, 15 years ago, his TED Talk was focused on how great leaders start with why. And I won't belabor this point, but I would encourage you to look up his YouTube video. It's Simon Sinek. Last name is Sinek. And the title is How Great Leaders Start With Why. But I'll give you just a little bit of a visual for this, because the why in his story is basically the vision. So if you will imagine an archery target with a yellow bullseye in the center and a red ring around that and a larger blue ring around that, his methodology says that in the center, the bullseye is the why. This is our reason, it's our purpose, our mission, and our vision is often sort of aligned with fulfilling that mission. The next ring around that is the how. So in our case, it might be, this is how we raise money and awareness for our respective orchestras. And the largest ring around that is the what. So in this case, the what is, we are a volunteer group that supports the Plano Symphony or the Dallas Symphony or whatever it may be. And the case that Simon makes in this video very eloquently and in much greater detail than I am here is that most organizations, whether it be a business or a nonprofit or a volunteer group, often start in the wrong place. They start with the what. This is what we are. We're a volunteer group. And that includes when you're recruiting new members, when you're inviting guests to an event, whether it's free or a fundraising event, or when you're asking somebody for a direct contribution. It's, we're a volunteer group, we support our orchestra, here's how we do that. And then if we even get to the why of it, that tends to come last. And Simon makes a very compelling case that we should always start with the why. So we raise money because music matters in our community. It inspires people and it creates a pathway through our music education programs for children to find the very best in themselves. That's a very simple why statement. And as obvious as that sounds, you're all very busy. And when you step into leadership roles for your respective volunteer organizations, the first thing you have to do is focus on, I've got to fill my board, I've got to fill these committees, we've got all these dates to set, we have to start planning invitation lists, and on and on and on. I don't have time to talk about this, but I would argue differently. I think great leadership starts with the why we exist and a reminder of that on a very consistent basis. So start with your mission. What is the purpose that you exist? And I would encourage your very first meeting with your board or your volunteer group as a leader to start with some very robust and open-ended dialogue around how do we deliver on our mission this year, and make a simple one-sentence vision statement based around that. And then I would return to that over and over and over again. If you've ever heard the axiom about giving a presentation to adults, it starts with tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. It never hurts to bring us all back to the mission. And if we do that, more people are going to be inspired to participate. They're more likely to agree on strategy because we're all aligned with the goal towards which we're working. We're going to have a focus on what we have in common rather than potentially getting distracted by our differences and lack of agreement on things, which is all too easy to happen in any volunteer organization. And also, and I think this is an important one, it gives you a better position from which to evaluate new ideas and new opportunities, because I know you're always looking for ways to bring on more members, to have a new fundraising event or revamp an old one to raise more money or have more impact. And if you start with what is our vision, in evaluating those opportunities, you can decide, is the input worth the potential reward in terms of advancing towards our mission? And so the second thing that I said about great leadership is that I think it involves creating alignment of purpose. And I gave you a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning that one of the challenges with leadership is personalities and who we are as humans. And it's part of what makes it great and fun and special. And it's part of what can make you want to pull your hair out sometimes. And that's just a reality. I talk about creating alignment with purpose, and in my mind, I think it's one of the most important aspects of leadership, because if we can have unity on what it is that we're trying to achieve, it makes it so much easier for us to set aside our differences or our disagreements or our personality conflicts, or just simply work through challenging situations like a global pandemic, which can derail everything. By bringing us back to that alignment of purpose, which simply flows out of the vision, it allows you to set up and communicate a clear vision, not only with your fellow volunteers that you're leading, but with your potential audience and constituency that you want to engage in all of this. And then through that, you can really focus and have effective planning sessions and know what it is that you need to achieve and how you need to achieve it. And also, when invariably you run into conflict, and by the way, conflict is not always bad. It can be very healthy, particularly if it's a robust discussion around a board or committee meeting table. By bringing it back to what our vision is and making sure we're all aligned around a purpose, it's much easier to come to some general agreement about, okay, this is a good idea, this is also a good idea, but we can only do one. Which one do we collectively feel like best serves this? And it also takes a lot of the personality and personal concerns out of working with volunteers. And then again, I'm going to say this, it may sound silly, but I would repeat the vision and remind people around the purpose, remind people about the purpose around which we're aligned at every single board and committee meeting. It can be very short. I'm not saying you have to rehash it for 10 minutes, but a simple statement of, I want to open the meeting by reminding us all that we are here to provide more educational opportunities for students in our communities. And this fundraising event that we're working on, be it new or 40 years old, is one of the seminal things that we do each year to make that possible. So let's find the best way we can to get more people engaged in supporting that purpose. So then, the third step, we've talked about vision, we've talked a little bit about creating alignment of purpose. Next comes inspiring people to take action. And I think there's some, at least in my opinion, I think there's some misunderstanding around what it takes to be inspiring. Winston Churchill was known for being a great and inspiring orator and leader. There are people who inspire by leading through example, and maybe they're not uh, great at talking to people or giving speeches. There are others who their track record of success simply stands on its own and people want to follow them. Um, some people inspire by being exceptional tactical planners. No detail goes unattended. They always have perfect agendas for everything. Everything's well thought out. They're giving reminders constantly, and you think, oh boy, they must have their life together. But maybe they're not great writers or speakers. And then there are people who can be inspirational just because they're beloved by everyone. We all know that person or those few people who everybody seems to love them no matter what. I think the key here to being inspiring is not to feel like you have to be a member of Toastmasters or be Winston Churchill or be a great writer. The real key here is self awareness. And I think it's about an honest assessment with yourself of what your strengths and what your limitations are. And then lean into your strengths as a way of inspiring people, and then find resources, in this case, other volunteers who have strengths that offset your limitations. And the one thing I would say, and this is getting a little bit in the weeds, but something that I find that helps, if you're not a person who is naturally outgoing, or you're not comfortable asking people to do things, or maybe you're not the most eloquent speaker, or you get in a situation where you have to ask somebody for something important and you get very nervous, that's okay. You can still very much inspire people to action. What I would encourage you to do is find a trusted friend who you feel very comfortable with and ask them to help you get that part right. Now, make sure, again, your friend offsets that limitation for you by being someone who is very eloquent, and have a conversation with them about how they can help you bring the right people around the table with you. So I know you all work on this when you recruit for your boards and your committees every year. Maybe it's the chair or honorary chair of a large event, or even a small one. You ask somebody to allow you to host a special event in their home, whatever it is. You can still inspire people even if you're not the person who is comfortable making a very eloquent, succinct ask of them, by surrounding yourself with the right people. Um, and then the other thing I would say is, and this goes back to the why, the very first part of this. One of the greatest ways to be inspiring, even if you're not eloquent, because, and I keep coming back to that because I think a lot of people really get stuck on, I have to be a great speaker to be a great leader. And no doubt, leaders oftentimes have to speak in front of groups of all sizes. But I think one of the first things that you can do to inspire people is to start by telling them the reason that you're involved, why this is important to you. This organization has had this impact in my life. My greatest lifelong friends came because I joined the junior group 30 years ago, and we've been volunteering together ever since. Or my life was changed because I learned to play an instrument, and I was a timid child, and it brought me out of my shell, and I went on to have a successful career as an attorney. Or I love the experience of listening to great music, and it matters because it's something that unifies us all and we can all connect to, regardless of our political views and our backgrounds and whatever it might be. And that matters in our community. I'd like you to join me in being part of this. You can inspire people by telling them why it matters to you in a very authentic and simple way. And I think it starts there. And then ask them to bring their talents and skills to bear. So that's the next thing. We've done an honest assessment of ourselves about what our strengths and limitations are. Now we have to do an honest assessment of other people's strengths and limitations. And as you all know, because you've sifted through many host committee lists and prospect lists for chairs and all sorts of board groups, this is a community project. I would surround yourself with a couple of people that have differing networks than you, and have some open dialogue. This isn't to pick on anybody, but say, you know what, I know that so-and-so is brilliant with invitations. They will get it designed perfectly, on time, all the right people will get to approve it, and they've got a great relationship with a print house who is never late. Let's talk to them, they've never been involved. That sort of a thing. Maybe you are great at speaking, but you can't manage a calendar to save your life and you're constantly late or missing meetings. find somebody to serve on your board who is brilliant with calendars and loves sending meeting invitations to everybody and calling to send, give reminders, whatever it is. Again, very simple concepts, but it comes back to what do I bring to the table and how do I tell my story about why I want to invest my most precious resource, which is my time, of course, and then use that as a leverage point to ask people to join you in doing the same. And in my experience with doing that, whether it's asking somebody to commit 1 hour for one meeting or give a $10 million gift or anything in between, it's almost never a no. It's just typically a no for now. And it's if you do it in that way, very rarely do people say, I'm just not interested. It just becomes a timing issue. And I think you'll find a lot of success there. So just to recap, I would say ask yourself the question, who can I find that has strengths that are not my own? And I want to take us on a detour for just a moment, because I think this is an important part of leadership. Speaking of people who have strengths that don't necessarily match our own, one of the limitations that we can all fall victim to as leaders, and I certainly do this myself, we can have a tendency to only ask our friends and those people with whom we're comfortable. And that makes sense. We know them. We know their strengths and weaknesses. There's a level of comfort asking them to do something. We know we're going to enjoy working with them. The challenge in that is we can oftentimes look over opportunities to engage somebody else who can bring something really valuable or different to the table, or who maybe they're too shy to raise their hand, but they've just been waiting to do something. But there's even more value there. There's, as you know, a great deal of conversation happening everywhere in the world, including in the Orchestra world right now, around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And one of the things that gets overlooked about that part of the concept is this idea of different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds and skill sets. And when you bring people who have different perspectives together around a table, you're naturally going to create a certain amount of conflict. And I said earlier, that's not necessarily a bad thing in the context of leadership. And so this little sort of side diversion I want to go on with you for a moment is, I also find oftentimes that great leaders lean into things that are uncomfortable and they cultivate healthy disagreement. Now, there's a way to do that, and I'll talk just a little bit about it. I'm not suggesting that this is interpersonal conflict. When I say healthy disagreement, I mean robust discussion around different ways to approach a challenge or solving something or a strategy. And by bringing people who are maybe not necessarily always in our close circle of friends, or who we know have a different opinion or a different set of experiences than us, to the table, we automatically cultivate an environment where they're going to naturally push back. And it doesn't mean that it's negative pushback. It could be simply framed as, I hear you, and I've had this experience and these results, and what do you think about that as an alternative option? And then have dialogue about that. It is okay to disagree in the context of a meeting, and part of our job as leaders is to find that challenging balance between cultivating that disagreement so that you can get to the actual best answer, not just the one that we all started with as being most comfortable, because that's been our experience. Find the balance between that and then maintaining happiness with everybody being there. And I think that we do that as facilitators, as leaders. So it's making sure that you're helping to control the dialogue and the narrative. So I hear you so-and-so. I think that's a unique and different perspective. So-and-so, what do you think about that? And what do you like about it is a great way to start that. So you actually ask them a positive leading question rather than why don't you like that or why can't we do it? So it's all about, as leaders and facilitators, how we can frame these dialogues back and forth that are challenging with one another so that we can get to how do we deliver on our vision in a positive way. So it's questions like, well, what do you like about their idea, even though it differs from you? And what do you think we can learn from it? And the goal here is to get people, again, aligned around the same purpose and realize we're not working against each other. We're working together to try to find the best way to move forward. So to recap, inspiring others toward action it goes back to knowing our strengths and weaknesses and surrounding ourselves with a diversity of people and experiences who can offset those and complement them. And then finally, now that everybody is understanding of what our vision is and we have unity of purpose and have sufficiently created the environment to inspire them to take action, which, by the way, inspiration is a fleeting thing. It's something we have to do over and over and over again, especially as things become challenging, particularly when things become challenging. The next question, and I think this is one of the most important and easily overlooked for leaders, and that's how do we make sure that our fellow volunteers have the support and resources they need to be successful. It's a very simple concept I know you've all heard of called servant leadership, and I don't want to preach to you about this, but I'll just share my perspective on it. It really does start with this question: how do I help people be successful? And sometimes you have to ask yourself internally, what's the question or the concern behind the question or concern that was actually stated? Oftentimes, we're all guilty of, we express what's really getting in our way in one way, but it might be something else, whether it's an interpersonal challenge or fear of something, where, maybe it's, hey, I'm tasked with this, chairing this event. I hate asking people for things. I can do every part of this but asking. And so you might find yourself with a chair who came highly recommended and has all these past successful events who hasn't done anything yet. Because the first step is, well, we have to identify a host for this event at their home, and we can't do dates until that, and nothing else flows from that. And maybe they're just afraid, and they don't want to tell people they're afraid to ask because they've had help in the past. So it's an example of sort of understanding what's really going on in the background and then finding a way to overcome that hurdle for them. And that's one of many examples. It's an easy example, oftentimes, particularly when we're, again, dealing with people and humans and personalities. These can oftentimes be much more complex. But starting with that question, I think, makes all the difference. And so there's two ways that I think this can easily be incorporated in your various volunteer groups and for you as leaders. One is, I like to ask the question, and I would encourage you to do this at board and committee meetings. Start or close or somewhere in the middle, what can I do to help you be successful? Are there barriers and challenges in your way that we can help you overcome, that we can have other resources brought to bear? Maybe somebody knows somebody else who can be helpful here that we just didn't think of, or there's a different strategy or path. And then extra credit, and I think this is where you can really make a difference. Outside of the meeting context, I would encourage you to check in with all of your volunteers who are working with you on a somewhat consistent basis, on an individual basis. Because as you all know, oftentimes people don't necessarily want to say publicly in a meeting or a committee group what might actually be a concern for them or a limitation or something that is an obstacle. So by checking in with them one-on-one, and I would do this even if on occasion, even if you're not aware that there's a challenge or an issue, and just say, hey, how's everything going? Obviously, you can never overthank a volunteer, even as volunteers yourselves. I wanted to say how much it means to me that you've invested time in this alongside of me. Is there anything I can do for you? Do you need anything? Can I connect you with anybody? Do you need resources? Do you have the budget you need? Whatever it is. And you may or may not be able to provide it, but at least you can work through it with them. So I want to close with a couple of things, and then I know we have plenty of time still for some conversation. But I want to bring it back to why I wanted to focus more on the human side of leadership today, rather than sort of tactical things. How do you run meetings? How do you do strategic planning sessions? Things like that. And there certainly are those resources out there. If anybody would like them, I'm happy to point you in the direction of some that we used here at the Dallas Symphony. Many of you have been doing this work with your orchestra and your respective volunteer group for a long time, and you know how to plan events, you know how to run a board meeting, you know how to raise money and put an invitation list together. I mean, my gosh, you all probably must have done that countless times. So often, though, I think it's easy for all of us to forget to focus on the human component of volunteer work. And what's really going on behind the scenes, and how we help set people up for success and happiness individually and as a team. And I will tell you, one of my jobs with the Dallas Symphony, I'm head of development, but we're very lucky here, and I want to give a shout out to the Dallas Symphony Orchestra League. We're fortunate to benefit from one of the most robust volunteer groups in the country, and they do an extraordinary amount of work to raise money for our education programs and to create general awareness of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra in our community. I have a colleague on my team who is the director of volunteer services, who works directly with our league and supports them. And for the most part, she handles it beautifully and with aplomb. And I receive great reports from every volunteer in our organization about her. On occasion, she'll bring me in to help her address a challenge or overcome a hurdle. And as I was thinking about our conversation today, it occurred to me 9 out of 10 times that's related to some sort of human factor. It's not they don't have enough money, or the printer's behind, or the venue's not working. There's an interpersonality conflict going on here. And it's not because anybody doesn't mean well. That's just the reality of people working together and personalities. And I think what I've shared with you today, based on my experience, are the things that help us most successfully navigate those and remind people why we're all here. And that's because we love music. We love what music education does in our community, and we want that to thrive. And then there's all sorts of other personal benefits as well that comes from that. So details and timelines are critical, but if we can make each individual in our organization, in our various leadership roles, if we can make them feel vital and like they're a valued part of the mission, and we can find a way to involve them that leans into their strengths and the things that they want to do, we'll find that we have much greater results, and we're going to go much farther in terms of advancing the mission of our volunteer organization, and by extension that of the your orchestra. So there's one final thing I wanted to share, if you'll permit me. It is slightly off topic, but I think it ties in a little bit, because it's something I get asked about all the time when I talk to volunteer groups associated with an orchestra. And it's this challenge around how do we cultivate the next generation of volunteers to be part of our volunteer group. And certainly one can make the argument that ties into leadership, because that's an important part of setting up the long-term future of your volunteer organization, and again, by extension, your orchestra. There is a lot to be talked about on this subject, and it really warrants a whole different conversation. But just a couple of insights I wanted to share, if you'll permit me, on that. First of all, keep in mind, you've probably seen the data. The young generation now, and I'll just define that as, late 20s through early 40s, they want to be part of the community. They have been identified as a generation that wants to give back. And so that's the good news. That's the great news. They want to do what you're doing. They want to serve. They want to do something meaningful. In fact, all the research demonstrates they care less about possessions and more about giving back than prior generations, if you believe that or not. But that's what the data tells us. Here's the challenge. The way that they want to give back and be part of the community is different than you. So the question is, how do we involve them in the work that we do that's important, that you've derived so much fulfillment out of, and that has made such a difference in your community, in a way that fits with how you operate culturally, but also creates space for the next generation? And that's a question that's difficult to answer, but it's a question that I very rarely hear volunteer leaders in the various volunteer groups of organizations asking. I don't often hear the question, well, how do we meet them halfway? We're asking them to come to us. How do we take a step towards them? And so I would encourage you to ask that question. And then the other thought that I would share is, again, to state something that you all know very well, change is difficult and it's hard to embrace. But the reality is, if we want 30 and 40 somethings to be involved in our volunteer organizations, it is going to, by necessity, require a certain amount of change that is uncomfortable. But here's what I think is special. If we bring it back to our why or the vision, and we can have unity of purpose, that gives us some grounding, a place of comfort, if you will, for us and for the next generation around how we can do something special together and how you can engage them in your great orchestra in a way that is successful, feels good for you, feels good for them, and ensures the future. So I just want to share those additional thoughts with you. And with that, Susan, I think we're at about the time that you asked me to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Before you ask a before you ask a question, may I share this with you, please? I've thought about what you just said an awful lot. So the president and I went to the development and we said these things. One, we would like to develop social connections. So this is a way that more people can be a chairman of a social connection. So we have a walking social connections. It's called Symphony Souls. We have a gourmet group that provides the food for or either desserts for our Christmas membership and for our spring membership, which saves us a lot of money. We also have Pearls of the Symphony, of which they act like junior league hostesses so that we don't have to pay so much for staff. We have what we call a wine society, where you're having a mixture of young and old going to a place, talking about the wine at a restaurant. We're outside. There are some hors d'oeuvres passed, et cetera, but we're communicating, we're connecting. We have an arts and culture group. We have a girls' night out group. We have a destination trip, and we have Adventure Houston. And then we've just come up with the idea to get new membership is that we have what we call a games day at a country club. One person is a hostess, and she will either pay for a table or each individual will pay $50 and they will come and play. Oh, by the way, we also have a Mahjong group where we have taught people how to play Mahjong. Now, the deal is with the Social Connections group, they must give, we are all a circle. So they must give back to our symphony. And how do they do this? Well, they usher for our education programs. And we do it through the social connections. The social connection person tells them, here are we get the chairman involved from the ushering. She makes the list. She contacts the social connections chairman. They say personally, hey, it's Mahjong group. Let's all go on February the 25th. We'll carpool together. We'll have lunch together, and we will help these children socialize, et cetera. And then the other thing I've been thinking about that I just asked our CEO if he would consider a single tickets night out where you meet at a restaurant where you have the Pearls of the Symphony, making sure that everybody is connecting with each other. And then you get on the bus, you go to the symphony, you come back to the restaurant, you have drinks, everyone pays their own way, but the bus fee is in with the ticket fee. And everything is a circle. We are affected by membership, we're affected by ticket sales, but we are having fun. You've got to get people to connect with one another. And I can't tell you how successful this has been for us.
That all sounds wonderful. I gather you're involved with the Houston Symphony. You referenced Houston, Betty.
I am, and I have loved every bit of it. I've gotten to create pop-ups where it's getting people together. I cannot tell you the wonderful experience that I have had. And it's all, I don't care how good you are at running an event. If you're not a nice person and you do not help people connect, you're a zero. And when you are a part of a group, it is dishonoring to be dishonoring to someone in your group because they are a human being. But the most part is that you as a volunteer represent the Houston Symphony or your own symphony. We talk about that.
Certainly. I would further say that I think then the next question is, and how do we help people be ambassadors in that way? What resources are we giving them? And I have no doubt that you've discussed those, but just for anybody who sort of in their mind hadn't taken that automatic next leap, it's not just let me charge you all with doing this, but here's some ways collectively that we can be successful ambassadors. I also want to note that somebody listed John Maxwell's Five Levels of Leadership book. Our friend there did. So thank you for that. Yes, any other questions?
I have a question, James. Earlier, you were talking about being able to go to or tell people why you're volunteering or why you're part of the organization, especially if you've been doing it for a length of time. Have you found in any situation that there's value in having a volunteer board or group, committee, whatever the setting is, to do an exercise and write down their why and then share that amongst the group? So, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, I didn't know she did that, or I didn't know this person brought her in, or, any number of things that could probably lead to a lot of discovery and subsequent dialogue about, bringing in the younger generation, as you pointed out, and how maybe we get into situations where we're not as comfortable as we have been over the time that we've been volunteers.
Absolutely. I think it's a great suggestion, and I have nothing else to add to it.
Okay.
I think it's wonderful. And
So there is value in spending time doing that.
very much so. And you make
Okay.
a great point. How often do we discover something about somebody we've known and worked with for years, and you think, how did I not know that they played
Yeah.
clarinet at the University of Michigan or whatever it might be?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh, Joy.
When you were talking about the younger generation and you were talking about trying to meet them, halfway, well, what exactly would that look like? Or do you have any examples of what a halfway might actually be?
Sure. I do have some ideas for you, sort of more directionally rather than anything specific. And I actually wouldn't want to say, go do this, because it really comes back to, well, who are the people that represent, the younger generation in your community, and what are their wants, needs, desires, and opportunities? So the first thing I would say to you and everybody else here is, let's not guess at this. There are young people in your community. Find a way to engage a small group of them. Invite them out for dinner. If you can find, and what I might do is sit down and have a conversation with someone at the administration of your orchestra, and I'm hopeful that you all enjoy positive relationships with those individuals, and say, look, we're interested in earnestly cultivating the next generation that's going to be good for us and good for you, the orchestra, and we'd like to just pick the brains of a few people who are interested in the orchestra who represent the next generation. Can you pick out 2 or 3 subscribers or single ticket buyers who are of that age demographic and help us connect with them and invite them for a glass of wine or dinner? And we just want to get to know them and hear what might compel them to be involved in our group. And you may not like it all. You may like some of it. It may not all work. Some of it may be very inspiring, but so you don't have to take everything you learn. But I would start there. Start with the perspective of somebody who represents that group. And then I can tell you some specific examples of things we've seen at the Dallas Symphony that have really been a draw for the younger generation. One is they love the chance to network with people who are leaders in business and leaders in the city. They value that highly, and they look at that as an important opportunity. So one simple example might be, have a networking event for young professionals with members of your organization who are currently leaders of business in the community. And I would frame it as a networking event. Young people always love that sort of a thing. And of course, for anybody who has more experience and tenure in life, we love passing along our experience to the next generation and helping them along. And maybe you do that before a concert. I always like to remind us all to let's somehow keep music involved in it one way or another. But that's a simple idea of a way to do that. You could host a pre-concert reception for a younger audience. Again, you might want to do that in collaboration with the administration because they could easily provide the resources in terms of who to target and how to target them and that sort of a thing. So, maybe you have a young professional after party component to one of your big events. And again, this is not going to be a party like you might craft for yourself and your friends. So I'm not suggesting that, they burn the barn down or anything, but, there's some middle ground there that could be fun for everybody. So
Well, I know in Tyler, we do have a young professionals group. I think often they meet at lunch. They do a lunchtime networking meeting, but I think that would be a great resource to start talking to them.
yeah,
um,
that's great.
and just kind of find out what they're interested in and what else they're doing. But they are always interested in finding out what other people, how other people can help them understand business and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I will also say, at least in Dallas, there are a lot of younger people who love music. They really want to just be part of the orchestra. So let's not assume they don't want to be part of it, and let's be
Right.
confident in inviting them. Hi, Susan.
Oh, James, thank you. I wanted to say one thing about meeting them halfway, because I think it's helpful to meet people where they are, and knowing that most everyone loves some form of music. I think sometimes if you can, take what they're listening to and understanding, and then draw them into your classical music or whatever, and there is a pathway there, and the same would be true, classical music or opera, whatever. Sometimes it's just a learning curve. That's why I think education is so important. And I think on some of these little mixers or receptions, if there can be an educational component to try to help them, because I think sometimes people are really insecure about what they don't know. And sometimes these higher forms of music and such, they feel that they can't really have a good dialogue with others about it because they don't know so much, kind of an insecure thing. So I think to equip that younger generation, or try to kind of touch the palate and get them interested in learning more, is also a very powerful tool. It's just kind of hitting the sweet spot, not getting too much for them, and just knowing kind of their needs and their interest level. Just a thought.
Yeah, Susan, I agree with you. And to add to that a little bit, I actually think what you said applies to all generations to some degree. And again, I think this goes back to, well, what do we have in common that we can work from and build on? I know a lot of young people who they studied music in college. That's not what they do professionally more, but they can tell you the compositional structure of a Mahler symphony. And by contrast, I know a lot of subscribers who have been supporting the organization for 50 years that, by their own admission, cannot tell you what they heard or why they like it. They just love the experience. And so, Susan, I think you make a great point that in providing some easily accessible education opportunities and emphasis on easily accessible, I think everybody will benefit, the next generation and your current volunteer group. I mean, there's just so much to learn and enjoy about music. And the other thing that I think you strongly implied is one of our jobs, as all of us involved in this business of classical music, whether it's on the administrative side or the volunteer side, we need to make as many people in our community as possible feel like this is as much theirs as it is ours, that they're welcome. It's a comfortable experience. Sure, there's some tradition, and we ask you to not talk and take video during the concert. But you know what? It's okay if you accidentally clap between movements or at the end of the end of a very rousing third movement or whatever it is. It's not the end of the world. And you don't have to be in black tie, as an extreme example. If you want to put on your really nice jeans and a blazer, we'd far rather you be here dressed like that than not at all. It's that sort of a sentiment of how do we just make them feel like they're welcome and break down those perceived barriers. Joy.
At our last concert, I was watching this young couple to my right, and they were so engaged in listening to the music. I had more fun watching them watch the concert. So I thought, I can't let them get out of the concert hall without knowing how much fun it was to have them in the audience. And they were on a date night, and they said, well, we don't get out very often, but we wanted to come to this. I thought, oh, I wish I had had something I could have given them, a little card or something like a welcome to the symphony card or something where I could get their name also. So I could, because I never know if that was just a one-time thing, they were sitting there in front of me, but I just thought that couple and then the couple next to them, they were just so engaged in it, just having such a fun time at the symphony. I thought, well, I just introduced myself because I thought, well, how else am I going to meet him if I just don't go over there right this very minute and say how much I enjoyed watching them watch the symphony.
Yeah, that's great. I love that story.
Joy, what you've said is so key, because that's the whole thing. It's relationships. That's what our guest speaker today has been talking about, what Betty talked about, what others of you have alluded to. It's relationships. And I don't know anything about you. It's very hard for me to build common ground or build relationship or bottom line work with you. So I revealed at a symphony board member meeting that I won a disco dancing contest, and life changed. No, I don't know if life changed drastically, but it's just, it's about relationships and somebody coming over. What Joy just explained is the same thing at church. Go to a church sometime and no one speaks to you, you're not inclined to go back. Same thing for being at the symphony, welcoming people, and I had a friend the other day that said it was a very high office in our symphony here. And she said, there's no way I would go up at a party or to anybody I didn't know. And I didn't say anything. And she also, I think it's fun at symphony parties. If I'm seated with people I don't know, I'm an extrovert, but there's got to be at least some of that. Because otherwise, all the same people will sit with all the same people at all the functions and all the concerts, and the circle will not expand.
Yep, absolutely. Candace, I'm just curious, what city are you from, and what orchestra?
San Angelo.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Mm-hmm. You haven't heard of the San Angelo Symphony, the best symphony in the world? Well, let me tell you about it. I did hear the Dallas Symphony, the second best symphony in the world. So, I have to rank Tyler and Plant and go on down the list of all my buddies here, but no, we're awful proud. But
that's great.
Part of our organization is that we get to go hear other symphonies at our conference, and so that's been a great insight, and I haven't heard a bad one yet. They've all been fabulous. And Dallas was wonderful. And the Meyerson just was overwhelming, beautiful.
I think we are also fortunate in Texas to have so many orchestras of all shapes and sizes. It's a wonderful thing. I'm a big believer in rising tides, raising all ships. And so with that, because I want to be respectful of your time, Candace and everybody else on the call, I wanted to say a very heartfelt thank you to all of the work you do for your orchestra. It really matters so much. I know you know that, but the stories I hear from our patrons and donors and kids in our education program and the community at large about what the organization means to them, no doubt those stories exist everywhere in your communities. So thank you all so much for what you do to support that. I've dropped my email address in the chat. Please feel free to capture it before it's over. If you have questions, if I can do anything for you, if you're ever in Dallas and want to come to a concert, please let me know. I'll be happy to help you in any way I can.
Well, James, thank you so much for speaking to us. And thank you so much for letting us record this, because I know I'm going to go back on our TASO website and listen to this several times to just capture a part of this information. This has just been so helpful and so it's so exciting. It'll help get our symphony board, volunteer boards to stay invigorated for the rest of this year, and then help the leadership for next year. And then would you mind sharing with us, you could email Deborah and myself, you said you had some other resources that you could share, and then we could share that with our with our group too. You had talked about books or resources, and so thank you so much. And this has been such a helpful, informative, and inspiring program today. And I hope everybody stays warm and